Joining me now is Democratic Representative Deb Haaland of New Mexico. She's a member of the Laguna Pueblo people. She is a former leader of the Democratic Party of New Mexico, and along with Sharice Davids of Kansas, one of the first two Native American women elected to Congress. Congresswoman Haaland, good to see you. I'm not entirely in your state, but I'm close. I'm in the Southwest, and I'm glad you're able to join us today. I thought it was interesting, the conversation that I had with one of the voters I spoke to yesterday about indigenous issues as it relates to the courts. And for America's Native people, the courts remain positively or negatively a remarkable force. Recently, there was a voting rights law that was struck down in Montana. It was just last week by the Yellowstone County District Court, which had tried to prevent organizations from picking up ballots from members of their communities because of the nature of many people living on reservations in rural areas. That is thought of as a win for Native American communities that was struck down.
Well, yes, Ali, thanks so much for having me. And you're in the Southwest and I'm in Washington, D.C., because we have a lot going on next week as well. But look, yes, the Supreme Court, any court, they have huge impacts on tribes. And Supreme Court precedent is especially significant to tribes because one case that's decided affects all tribes, all 574 federally recognized tribes in the country. And a lot of times these cases will try to chip away at tribal sovereignty. That's been terrible through the years. However, you might get a case like the McGirt case that happened this summer that essentially reaffirmed the fact that treaties must be honored by the United States government. And, you know, the first sentence of that decision, the McGirt decision, referenced the Trail of Tears. Native Americans lost their land, they lost their lives for those treaty rights. And we are, I mean, yes, the treaties never expire. And, you know, sometimes we know that that courts will affirm those things, but the fact remains that the Supreme Court of the United States has a tremendous impact on Indian tribes.
You mentioned the McGirt case. This was interesting because the majority opinion in that case was written by Neil Gorsuch, a conservative appointed by Donald Trump. And he said that as a textualist, as someone who relies on the text rather than sort of a different interpretation of it, the east part of Oklahoma is native land. The Seventh Court of Appeals had upheld that approach, and in a different case called Oneida Nation versus the Village of Hobart, guaranteeing land to Native Americans in Green Bay. So, you know, the voter I talked to yesterday said, look, both parties have not been great, and a lot of American courts have not historically been great at upholding tribal and Native rights. What do you, I mean, do you see this as an example of courts making Native Americans whole again?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's, you know, you can't, it's sort of, I mean, you never know what the outcome is going to be, right? And so so sometimes, I mean, it's a little bit of a crapshoot whether we can get a favorable decision or not. But what we hope is that you know, that any judge or justice is completely informed on what the history is and what the case is. And it's so important. You know, I came to Congress, as you mentioned in the introduction, one of the first two Native women in Congress, working to make sure that we're always moving these issues forward. Native American issues aren't often in the news. They're not often talked about. Our history, Native history is American history, as I've often said. However, a lot of folks don't really understand that. And when you say, you know, some people actually believe that treaty rights expire. They don't expire. And so these are always things that we're working to ensure that, that people understand. The history of our country, the trust relationship between tribes. And in fact, as I mentioned, the trust relationship was opinioned by the Supreme Court. The United States owes that to tribes. So we keep moving these issues forward. We keep trying to make sure that we tell our history, that we have a voice at the table, and always hope for the best.
And that's a failure on the part of the media that those stories are not told, and we will try and change that. Thank you, Congresswoman Deb Haaland.